morning and welcome to another Recruit My Mom, She is Talented series. Today I have a wonderful guest with me by the name of Melany Green from Great Expectations, a company that really assists women in that transitional phase when they are thinking about having children or have been on maternity leave. And so for me, she's the guru on having conversations around returning to work and having deep conversations with employers around maternity leave. So welcome, Melany, and it's lovely to have a chat to you this morning.
Thank you, Philippa. It's really a pleasure to be joining you today.
Yeah, it's really, I really do appreciate your time and, of course, your wisdom. So, Melany, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and our watchers today and let them know a little bit more about you and about Great Expectations?
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Philippa. So, yes, I am the CEO and founder of Great Expectations, and we're wanting to support the individual, through this entire transitional period. So from the time that she first announces she's pregnant through to, which is more or less when we get to hear about her, and then through her maternity leave and into the months, at least 2 or 3 to 6, 8 months afterwards.
Okay. And so we get a lot of, at Recruit My Mom, we obviously have a lot of young women who are either thinking about starting a family or are pregnant and are now starting to really consider what are they doing with their careers, where are they going? And one of the questions that we often get asked is, how and when does one tell one's boss that you are pregnant? Because do you tell them sooner rather than later? Do you tell them just when you need to go on maternity leave? From your coaching experience, what's best?
Right. I think it's also quite an individual decision, this, Philippa, and it depends on the nature of the work that she's doing, her role, the people she's working with, the circumstances that she's in at the time. But generally speaking, I would say that the best time to share your news is obviously once you're through the more perhaps vulnerable period of the first 4 months. Obviously, I think a lot of mums anyway decide that they're going to sort of keep it under wraps, just to see themselves through to around about 16 weeks. But I would say, to rather err on the side of sooner rather than later. You have no reason to be embarrassed about sharing this news, or it should be a joyous thing to do, and hopefully you're going to get a joyous reaction from the people you share the news, not shock, horror. Oh my God, we're going to lose you. But I think it's important that you have the courage to talk about it early and allow people to start working with that idea and to start taking ownership from that point. I always say, you take ownership of your departure and you take ownership of your return. And I can flesh that out a little as we converse. But I think that's one of the first steps of ownership is that disclosure.
Okay. Yeah, and it should be a joyous occasion. You're right. Absolutely. The other thing we get asked is, can I ask my boss for support or additional types of support, either before going on maternity leave or during maternity leave or even after maternity leave? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think this kind of brings up the whole question or the whole topic or theme of the manager relationship. And in our view, in our research, about 87% of women we coach will cite their manager as the key influencing factor in the quality of their experience of this transition, both in the lead up to leaving and especially in the manner in which they reintegrate on return. And so I think it ought to be the kind of relationship where you can have an open and honest conversation around what this is feeling like. You're starting to think about your departure. You're starting to think about how you're going to be covered in your departure, that you're wanting perhaps to have some influence around who your cover is and how to equip them so that you can step out confidently and leave your legacy. I think, therefore, it should be, in an ideal world, I think we should be able to have that conversation and ask for support in that way. So, again, I'm sort of in my own head, I'm thinking the word support could have many different nuances, but I think feeling supported by your line manager and allowing your line manager to be able to have an open conversation with you is going to be a really critical. If anybody who's listening actually is a manager, please do understand how critical your role is at this time. And being very open to listening and to being empathetic to perhaps what's going on psychologically for the individual who's kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, I've worked so hard to get this role to this point, and I've got to hand over to somebody else and disappear for 4 or 5 months. So I think that should be something, and definitely on return, these conversations are critical. And I always say, just err on the side of communicate, communicate, communicate.
I like that. I like the fact that you are encouraging the person that's going on maternity leave to take the ownership and to own the communication and to own the process. I think that I know that what we see often in a kind of an employer-employee relationship is that employees have quite a lot of expectation of what the employer should be doing.
Yeah.
And the reality is that often employers are running bigger teams, or they have other priorities, and so maybe missing things. Whereas if the person going through it is communicating, that must be a lot more positive for the whole process.
Yeah. I think you're sort of you're setting yourself up for success. You're setting yourself up for, you want to almost start as you want to finish. So it is part of getting that whole sort of narrative right before you come back. And you're doing this, you're being very deliberate. So, you are being quite intentional around some of the things that you're putting in place and the relationships that you're cultivating and so on in the lead up to going. I mean, some people only start thinking about their handover plan at the last minute. They're kind of almost rushing to the door to go and deliver their baby, and they're still thinking about their handover plan. You really want to be able to think about this a whole lot earlier. It needs to be a game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is such great advice. Thanks, Melanie. Okay, so when women go on leave, should they feel compelled to stay connected with work during this time period? Is it a requirement or an expectation? And how should women manage an expectation from a manager if they do have that expectation?
So this comes up a lot in our sort of pre-leaving conversation. Some people have thought about it. A lot of people haven't thought about it. So we bring it into the conversation because it really is important to think about. And the question goes also back to, what do you want for your maternity leave? So before we look at, what are the organization's expectations? I mean, you're about to go off and have a baby, or your second baby or your third baby, whatever. But this is your time. And, what do you want for your maternity leave? And when I ask the question, often, women, especially a first-time mum, will say, well, I haven't really thought about it. But often I'm working with a lot of A-type personalities and lawyers and women in finance, and they kind of like holding on to the last minute, don't want to let their matters go and so on. And so all they're thinking about is maybe staying connected during their maternity leave. And I obviously, as their coach, can't say, no, this is a bad idea. But I do try and get them to think about really, what do you want? And when you don't know what you don't know about what actually is going to happen in those sort of first 2 months of manic kind of just repetitive, babies feeding and sleeping, and you trying to just do normal things in between. So my feeling is that, well, first of all, I think most women will acknowledge that they want protected time out, that they start to realize, actually, And they realize very quickly once a baby's born that actually the last thing on your mind is work. You actually couldn't care anymore on day 3. So the protected time out, meaning being able to just immerse yourself in motherhood and just get yourself to a point where you are being mom. Your identity is shifted dramatically. And you want to be able to do that for as long as possible. You might only have this leave once, so you don't want to have regrets. But there is a point at which there might well be some connection needed. And I would say for most women, I do encourage them to have some form of connection with work before they come back, because that's part of your ownership coming into your return. And that could take on many different guises. So depending on the length of your leave, some women manage to take longer because of adding on annual leave. They might have 5 or 6 months, in which case they might want to, in the last month or two, start, maybe pop into the office and see their team, maybe even go and spend a half day there while they're kind of piloting their support system at home, start getting their emails back up and running, start doing some reading, start a little bit of re-engagement with a few people. But it could be very ad hoc and very casual, but still intentional. And it helps to alleviate the anxiety of, almost that first day of work, because you've already got yourself into the mindset. That's super helpful. It just helps you feel empowered, and it kind of moves. I always say action drives out fear, so it kind of gets them ready to kind of start getting back to work. As far as the organization is concerned, I have never come across any organization that expects a woman to be in contact and online while she's working. To be honest, I really haven't. I think there might be some who take advantage if she wants to do that. So I always remind the woman, what happens if they send you an email and you've decided to keep your email open, and you sort of see an email coming through and you think, oh my God, they're not doing that, are they? And you suddenly start typing a response. They know that the game is on because you're now open to business. And then it's going to be your own ability to manage your boundaries to stop that really kind of interfering and taking over your maternity leave. So in some cases, they said, actually, you know what, I'm going to just remove all notifications on email. But I would say that whatever you decide, if you want to keep some level of engagement, it's entirely your call. Whatever you do, you have this conversation with your manager and any of the other stakeholders before you go. If you don't want any contact, you tell them. And if you do, you tell them how you want to be contacted, like on WhatsApp or on email or whatever.
I think that's own it. It's just such great advice. And I liked what you said about for women, particularly who are going for their first maternity leave, is that there is a very big shift in identity that happens that you can't be prepared for until you have that child. And so so this is really helpful. So just moving forward to, you've had your maternity leave, you decided that you're going to have your break, you've maybe popped into the office a couple of times, you've kept connect with the team as you're starting to think about going back. Now it's time to go back.
Right.
How does one start to prepare emotionally and physically for leaving this precious bundle behind in order to re-enter the workplace? What were your recommendations on this? And could you also talk to the role that flexibility, working flexibly, might play in this as well?
Yeah, I'm just going to write that down, because as I start talking, I get carried away. So first of all, I think it's never easy. So we never try and sugarcoat the fact, when you go back to work, whether it's after your first or your second or your third, honestly, it's always a tough transition. This is the next identity shift for somebody who's not a mum, who hasn't ever been a mum before. You started before you had kids. You were sort of, your identity was with your career, your role at work. You now have had 4 to 6 months purely being mum, and now you're coming back to this thing called a working mother. What the heck is that? And how is it going to feel, and what does it look like? How does it translate in my day-to-day activity? There's that going, that's a huge thing that's going on. So there's this tension. So I always say that, most important is the quality of your return is going to be largely based on the quality of support you have. So that means the support system that you have put in place at home and the support system you have at work that you can tap into, and your own ability to ask for help, which should be a habit you get into really early on in your maternity leave. So we have to, usually in our sort of pre-return conversation, we'll talk about your reverse handover. So taking charge of what's going to be happening on the home front, or your baby care situation, what's going to be the child care formula that you have put together. So that reverse handover at home is really important, and making sure that, and this is something that as a dual career couple, you don't take on your return to work on your own. It's not just your deal, it's your and your husband's deal. So as a dual career couple, having a conversation around what's going to change when I suddenly step out of full-time being at home and back into work, and what do we need to put in place to be able to facilitate that. So that's a critical piece. Choosing, what kind of childcare they want, how it's going to work, who the extended support system is, all the plan B, plan C, plan D. And then starting to engage at work. And part of engaging at work, as you so rightly say, might be a conversation with your manager prior to stepping back in around how you are going to operate, what your work pattern is going to look like on return. And you might not even know yourself what that might look like, but you have an idea that maybe you're wanting to only avoid the commute and start at 10 in the morning and work until 3 and leave, but you're going to be picking up later on in the day. So you want flexibility within whatever the structures or policies are at work. So, even if it's a hybrid policy of work from home 2 days a week and in the office 3, those 3 days could still have flexibility within them. But it's actually, this is where, we have to have the courage to have very critical conversations with our manager around what could this look like for me? What wiggle room do we have for me to be able to operate, and to start thinking about the kind of work pattern you want initially, and which could change. So, if they give you flexibility, you also have to give flexibility in return. And to really start thinking about what that could look like for you. Thinking about, so I think organizations have such a responsibility to ensure that there are facilities at work for expressing. Biggest anxiety I have vocalized by women is when they're still breastfeeding and they go back to work, and where am I going to do it? We have some people sitting in the loo breastfeed. I mean, that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or going into the car park and sitting in their car and expressing. That's kind of like such dark ages. So, I think one of the easiest things for any organization to do is to create a nice private place where women can quickly go, do their expressing, a little fridge there to keep the milk in, and then get back to work. So that conversation is a really important one to have. And I think in some instances, better to have either just prior to going back, or once in the first week you're back, and actually set that appointment up with your manager before you head back. So you go back in and you've got a date in his or her diary to sit down and chat about, what is my reintegration going to look like? How can I sort of co-manage this with you?
Fantastic. Such helpful, useful advice. I wish I had had some of this advice when I had gone on my first maternity leave. My son arrived 6 weeks early, so I didn't even have the option to think about anything. And that's also something to consider, because you're not sure whether your baby's going to arrive early. So don't start thinking about it just a month before,
No, and they do. I would say 9 times out of 10, the women that I coach, babies have arrived early. And I think it's just due to high stressful environments and wanting to work like a crazy person right up until the last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Melany, it's always a delight to speak to you. and your wisdom in this area is so valued and appreciated. I know there'll be many women and managers that will watching this that will really take valuable insights out of this, and I'm sure that our conversation today will have helped many. So thank you for
Great.
your time. It's always
Pleasure.
lovely to have you chatting to me, and I wish you well. Melany Green from Great Expectations. Do be in touch with her. We will post her details in the chat, in the snippet text where this video is, so you can be in contact with her. And yeah, thank you, Melany.
Thank you, Philippa. It was lovely as usual.